All right, last questions from Ryan. He says, while on flats, slight incline of less than 4% or anything with a negative gradient, I'm quite fast and can outride most of my friends. So this is a key point to notice earlier on. Ryan is basing his success on relative to other people. Okay. So this is important to point out. But as soon as the gradient rises, I grind to a halt and my heart rate skyrockets and I'm quite slow. So this sounds, the first 2 points sounds individual. The second point, I'm quite slow. That sounds relative to other people, right? He says, I was competing in a ride and could keep up with much faster riders until the gradient went up. I can predict this happening and always start my climb super slow. So we're getting into mental knots already too, in the sense that Ryan says he can predict this happens. So he's already built out the scenario that will happen on every climb, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. It says, what can I do for training, or how can I get better at riding steeper climbs that go for at least 1 to 2 hours, such climbs as Falls Creek, Mount Buffalo, Mount Hotham, and Victoria, Australia? So very relatable question for all of us, Ryan, because we all go slow on climbs. That's what happens. It goes up and we go down in terms of speed. And look, there is a governing rule, power to weight, in terms of bringing an object up a hill. There is weight and there is power. And those two things are what really that is governing. However, when we're talking particularly in this case about a relative effort to other people, execution makes a massive difference. And there's so much you can do within the world of executing and really using all the fitness that you have on that climb to be able to change the time at which you arrive at, especially relative to other people. We'll get into pacing and we'll get into mentality and we'll get into a lot of different stuff here, and long climbs versus short climbs and how this changes. But I kind of want to go to mentality first, Amber, because this is a little bit worrying to me when Ryan's like, this happens every time. I know it's coming. And every time it happens, it just reinforces. He has this fear that he is going to get dropped compared to other riders on climbs, and it's just happening over and over again. What are your thoughts on this from a mentality perspective?
Well, just to reiterate what you said, and I think it's worth saying again, even though I'm just repeating you, everyone's speed drops on climbs and everyone's heart rate goes up on climbs. So this is not unique to you. And even the folks that you see who are quote unquote riding away from you are experiencing drops in speed and increases in heart rate. So this is totally normal. It's totally normal. And it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you or there's something wrong with your climbing. So let's start there. From there, there's still things that you can do to improve. And I think a really low-hanging fruit item that you can address right away is that mentality. So like Jonathan said, you are reinforcing this story in your head in a way that is creating a predictable result and a self-fulfilling prophecy here. So it's a good thing to stop and start examining what are the stories that you've made up in your head. And yes, you can say, okay, I'm not a good climber because on these climbs, every time somebody climbs away from me. So look at this mountain of evidence to prove
no pun intended.
that I'm right.
Hey, that was good. Amber's got jokes.
That was good. Hashtag mom jokes.
Yeah.
So just because you have this evidence doesn't necessarily mean that, the correlation does not equal causation here, because this might just be a self-fulfilling prophecy situation, especially if your fear of getting dropped on a climb is making you start the climb extra slow right off the bat. You're not even giving yourself a shot at this. It's a foregone conclusion before the road even goes uphill. So first things first, I would look at what are the stories in your head? What are the things that go through your head when you see a hill coming? Just note what are the phrases, the words, the things that come up for you. And then start to break those down a little bit. And that can be really hard, because if this is a story you've been telling yourself for a really long time, it's become deeply entrenched. And it might be really difficult to flip that switch all of a sudden. That's really hard for any of us to do, because we get these stories embedded and these beliefs embedded. So some things that you can do to gently coax yourself out of these beliefs are, a phrase that I like to use is just for today. Just for today, I'm a good climber. It's a lot easier to wrap your head around than, okay, yesterday I sucked at climbing and today I'm going to be this miraculously amazing climber. That's going to be really hard to get yourself to buy into that. But it's a little bit easier to buy into something that's just for today, I'm a good climber. Another thing that's easier to buy into is curiosity. So instead of, telling yourself, I'm going to get dropped on this climb, take a different tack. What if I try to stay with my friends as we start the climb? How long can I stay with them? Is a very different question than I'm just going to get dropped, so I'm going to give up before I even try. So what that's doing is that's adopting a position of curiosity. Getting curious about what you can do. Give it a shot. I mean, you're already giving up at the bottom of the climb. What harm is there in trying to stay with them and then maybe getting dropped a little bit further up the climb? And then every time you try, maybe you get a little bit further and further. Nonetheless, you will learn something about pacing. And on an hour or 2 hour long climb, the friends that you're riding with, their paces are going up and down. So they may not be holding that fast pace that you see at the beginning of the climb for more than 20, 30 seconds, but it's long enough and you've given up soon enough that the gap blows open and you don't get to see when their pace drops later when they get tired. So get curious about it. See if you can take an experimental mindset to it and take the judgment out of it. So what if you don't stay with them the whole time? What if you do get dropped a little bit further up? You learn something from it. And the whole point of engaging with this learning curve is to learn and to continue to improve. And this is just a process that's going to keep going forever. So you can just get in and learn something from every ride, and taking the judgment out of it will make that a lot more approachable for you.
There's got to be a scientific term, or maybe a German word. Germany seems to have words for everything, for thinking you're the only one suffering, but indeed everybody else is, right? Like,
Yeah.
because we all go into this, we all think that we're the ones that suck at climbing when we go on the climb, when everybody else drops us, and that's what we do. There's so much value, even in this scenario when you're riding against other people, in finding ways to measure against yourself and challenge yourself rather than do it compared to others. Because there are so many times when you do that and you end up actually further ahead than the people that were more focused on competing with everybody else. It's especially when we're talking about climbing, right, Alex? Because there's kind of like, no matter what you do, if you go out way above your threshold at the bottom of a climb, it's going to bite you later on. Like, pacing is key. How do you try to pace these longer climbs? So we're talking Leadville has a few examples of these really long climbs when we're talking 1 to 2 hours long. How do you try to pace yourself? We've mentioned this on the episode before. You're kind of like the robot on the right. You're our resident robot. So
just turn on erg mode.
Yeah, exactly. Flip on erg and stick to it. Do you just very strictly stick to a certain power target, or how do you approach these long climbs? Do you go easier earlier on? How do you do it?
Yeah, I'll stay consistent through the climb, but as far as RPE, I normally feel easier at the beginning. Normally, like if you split, it's like a threshold effort sort of thing. The first 20 minutes should be manageable. The middle 20 minutes should be hard. And then the last 20 minutes should be really hard. And kind of,
are you talking about threshold efforts that last an hour, Alex? Because I'm not sure anybody likes to do those or even does.
Sorry, we're going to go with FTP isn't actually what you can hold for an hour. Got it.
Yeah.
It's imaginary numbers.
Yep.
Yeah. So more so just like the RPE should go up as you go through, but the power should stay the same. Also, I looked up this Falls Creek climb first. Very jealous. I'd like to go to Australia now, please. Second, it says the average gradient 3.9%. So it's in your wheelhouse. It's under 4%. So back in all seriousness, to Amber's point, just use that as fuel. Like, oh, it's under 4%. It's within my wheelhouse. Like, I got this, and give it a shot and see what happens. The worst thing that can happen is you get dropped. And I don't know, for me, the best motivation is getting dropped.
Yeah. So, what I do on climbs that are longer, so, and I'm talking, doesn't have to be an hour to 2 hours. I'm talking 15 minutes or above, right? So like any efforts like that, I want my first like 25%, my first quarter of that climb to feel within reach, like to feel like I am not flying close to the sun, to feel like when my power goes up a little bit, I'm not paying the price. It's all reasonable. Now, that shouldn't mean that it's easy. That should mean that and this is if I'm going for like even pacing, that shouldn't mean that it's easy. It's still hard and uncomfortable, but I am not at risk. I'm like well away from risk of blowing up. That second one, my goal is to get a little bit closer to finding where that line is for the second quarter. On the third one, My goal is to find the point where I can sustain that line. And on the last one, pure curiosity. It's seeing what I can do. And that's like a really good framework, I think, for pacing any effort. You can even do that for a short VO2 effort, but for long climbs, it really does apply. The one thing you just have to remember with long climbs, think of it this way. There's a lot of seconds in your long climb, and every second is a second where you can, where things can happen. And if you think about riding close to your limits, which you're likely doing on a longer climb, those things that can happen can either really make it so that you can't continue at that same power, or it can make it so that you can continue at that same power. So with all of that probability for things to occur, that's why you want to err on the side of caution. Because if you go on the aggressive side, which typically looks like they're rolling away from me, I'm just going to match them, even though you know it's something that you can't probably hold. That's only going to bite you on long climbs. Give yourself the chance to surprise yourself, like Amber said. Like, go into this and stick to something that you know is doable and see how it works. And you know what? You may not be faster than them. They may have crazy power to weight ratios. That's okay. But it doesn't matter, because you shouldn't hold yourself to their standards. Instead, you should hold yourself to your standards. So as a result, think about what you can do to execute as well as you can. And this, we've talked about this before, but on long climbs, it's so crucial. Once again, there's no time to rest. There's really high average power, which means there's high calorie burn because there's no downtime, right? So you're doing all of these things. That means that nutrition is so key. And that's one way where I have seen athletes with way lower power to weight ratios outclimb people with much higher power to weight ratios. It's just because they've nourished themselves appropriately. So this is coming into a climb, before the climb, and throughout the climb, you are sticking to a really solid nutrition and hydration plan. If you do that sort of stuff and you pace yourself appropriately, you will outclimb most cyclists that are close to you in terms of power to weight ratio. It's going to happen. If that's the real concern, then set yourself up for success. Approach it with curiosity, like Amber said. Have a pacing plan that you know you can execute on, that it still allows you to get more out of yourself maybe than you think you can get. And then make sure that you are nourishing yourself. Those are just such huge keys. Another, like a couple small tips too, get in and out of the saddle as you wish. If it's something that's costly, that's fine, but don't feel like you have to stay in the saddle or have to stay out of the saddle whenever it gets steep. Be flexible and let yourself execute however you want. Like, it's in your domain. You're the master. So you get to decide how you want to do that. And the same thing with cadence too. Let yourself explore and ride at the cadences that you want. Just know that if you're riding at too low of a cadence and you have gearing that's going to be a limiting factor, that's going to introduce fatigue on your muscles that's probably going to be foreign to you. But same could be said for even spinning at too high of a cadence. So once again, give yourself flexibility, but at the same time, just make sure that you aren't trespassing too far over limits that you already are very well aware of that you have.
One thing I might suggest, if you're somebody who really struggles with this idea of failure, and this, it sounds like for them, the idea of getting dropped on a climb has really gotten into their heads, and it's going to be hard to rewire that. Totally possible. Do it in a gentle, progressive manner. It doesn't have to be a switch that you flip overnight, like I said, but maybe a way of addressing that is to flip it on its head and go for failure. Try wild, weird pacing strategies. Try, wild, weird gearing. I mean, go like straight into your easiest gear, or try standing when you feel like sitting. I mean, actually going for failure and seeing if you can learn something from that might help pull that judgment out of it. Because if your goal is to fail, then when you fail, it's going to feel a lot less disappointing. Nonetheless, you will have learned something that will paradoxically potentially put you in a position to be less likely to fail in the future. So it might be just a fun game that you can play with yourself. And then that way, when you make it a game and it's something that you're doing for fun and failure is the goal, then the fear of failure might be a little bit less daunting, and it might help you get into more of an experimental and curiosity-based mindset.
As it reminds me, I'm listening to a book right now called Never Split the Difference. And it talks about how getting that initial no in a negotiation starts the negotiation, how no isn't a negative. And it's interesting. I was thinking of it in terms of what you were saying of going for that first failure is kind of starting with that no. Okay, now we can start negotiating, like, okay, gearing or this or that. And in terms of that, it's interesting to see how failing can actually start the process of success. And you can start negotiating with yourself of like, okay, how do we get better from here? And then it talks about like labeling emotions. And you may not know that fear of failure is the emotion holding you back from this success until you experience it. And then you can label that. And being able to label the emotion is super powerful for being able to overcome it. So it's kind of an interesting tangent between the two. One tip that I was going to add is if you're doing outside workouts, start doing them on climbs if you're not already. The mechanics of climbing versus flats can be very different. I actually find this the opposite way around, and sometimes I have to force myself to do work on the flats, but I find high cadence, high power, like flat type work to be harder for me than lower cadence of the same or even higher power on a climb. So this may be switched for them, and being able to do those intervals on a climb or in that same cadence range may be part of what's holding them back from it. Just may feel different and feel weird. So the RPE and cognitive load goes up.
Yeah, it's all about the inertia that you have and how that force is applied through the pedal stroke, and it does feel different. And also the psychological effect of going on a climb versus being on the flat, riding at speed versus riding slow. It's absolutely there. Like, yeah, it can affect. I'm not sure that you can. I've never been tricked by trying to do that indoors by like changing the angle of things. My body's too smart, it seems like, I should say, yeah, it's dumb enough, but not that dumb. One other tip that I want to bring in, this is actually Fred that suggested this in our group chat here, or sorry, in the live chat on YouTube, which you can join us every Thursday at 8 a.m. Pacific. And you should totally subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't already. Go there and do that. youtube.com/TrainerRoad. But it says, what about pacing on the flats or sag climbing? And this is a great point that we've kind of overlooked in the terms of like, look, if you are going into these climbs and you've been pacing poorly all going into them, Ryan, it's not going to go well. like no matter what, if you have been setting yourself up for success leading into that, it's going to go well. If you're setting yourself up for success or not setting yourself up for success going into it, it's not going to go well. So, and sag climbing is something that can work, but, and it's something that everybody should be familiar with. And what it really talks about is getting to the front of the group and then letting yourself drift back slowly so you can put a lower average power over the course of the climb rather than getting at the back and then trying to work your way up into the group or trying to hold on. But the trick with sag climbing is that it puts yourself in a spot to be passed and to be dropped. And mentally speaking, that can be tough. And that can be tough to overcome. So if you are very experienced at it, you know it's a tool that you can use and you've used it before to great success, then yeah, you can really deal with that and even thrive in those situations because you know that you're working less than those people. But it can be tricky for people because they see it and they're like, well, I'm just getting past. This is terrible. And I'm going to go out the back. So yeah, for me, it's about having that pacing plan. Like I mentioned, splitting it up into quarters and that gives you opportunities to surprise yourself, nutrition. And Alex, what a fantastic drawing of that great book. Never Split the Difference. It's a popular one here at TrainerRoad too, for a lot of us. It's a great point of getting the no, getting the failure. And that's not a failure. Instead, what that is that's information. And then with that information, what you can do is you can work with yourself and improve from there. So super cool. Great thoughts.
If you like this video, make sure you give us a thumbs up.
If you didn't like this video, you can give it a thumbs down, but let us know what you would have done differently in the comments below.
If you want to see more of these videos, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. And if you want to become a faster cyclist, check out TrainerRoad.com.
Do it.